Our next presentation is going to be on the human AI partnership in manufacturing. That's going to be done by Tim Felbinger, the CEO and founder of StartProto. StartProto is a fast-growing manufacturing software company transforming how shops run their business. Tim has built the company from the ground up with a vision of modernizing the manufacturing industry through digital transformation and AI-powered automation. The company is pioneering the use of artificial intelligence to streamline workflows, reduce manual data entry, and enable manufacturers to operate smarter and scale faster. So please join me in welcoming to the stage, Tim Felbinger.
All right, thank you. It's not every day I got a microphone. It's usually like Zoom calls, but yeah. So I guess very brief background on myself. Grew up kind of between Germany and the U.S. My grandfather was a tool and die maker. My mom built websites back in the '90s, and then my dad builds a lot of the fancy automated warehouses you see. Probably where your Amazon Prime package came from. So grew up around a lot of that. Ultimately came to the U.S. Went through kind of your traditional engineering track. Ultimately ended up at Georgia Tech, worked for BMW for a while, saw kind of how they did things. And then for a number of years ran a prototyping lab where we'd make stuff for all the different research labs on campus, right? So every single day it was different parts in and out. And ultimately we had to work with a lot of suppliers who weren't necessarily always on time or maybe didn't always have the best quality. And a lot of that, it seemed like, came down to the systems that they were using in their businesses, right? So we ultimately kind of were like, okay, let's take this on. Let's see if we can help these guys, manufacture better, deliver parts for us, on time and right the first time. Around that same time, I was actually working in a research lab that had access to some of the very early AI models. So pre-ChatGPT, and one of the more fun things we did there, we used those very early models to create fake papers and submit them to conferences. And so kind of saw all that from day one and built that into kind of how we built the platform. Before we get too deep into that, kind of want to demystify a little bit of what AI actually is, right? Everyone always says it's artificial, it's intelligent, but it's not rocket science. I mean, it's pretty fancy, but ultimately it is a prediction algorithm, right? It is a very good way to predict what's next given a set of input data. So when you see, OpenAI or Anthropic or any of these other big model providers, they're giving you basically everything on this top level, right? So you see all these big data centers being built. Effectively what they're doing is they usually will start with a distillation of the internet, right? So remove all the ads from the internet, put it in a big file, and then train on that, right? So with that, you build what are called base models, which effectively with a set of parameters, which are effectively weights, right? So probabilistic weights given to different data. From there, obviously, they get trained into the assistants and thinking models that you guys probably use every single day, to where they basically get trained to interact like a person would. And that's what gives you kind of the, hey, who was president in XYZ date? Cool, it's going to look through its weights. It's going to figure out, okay, here's a bunch of textbooks that reference that. Here's your data. Now, that's sort of what happens at time of inference, right? The important part about that is actually having the right context at that point in time, right? So if you, for your manufacturing business, went in there and fed it, here's the 17 most similar parts, here's all this stuff as reference, and oh, by the way, here's a query that's related to that stuff I just gave you, you're going to get pretty good results. However, that's pretty difficult to do. And you often aren't going to necessarily know what is best to feed it as context. So kind of what are the key insights that we figured we needed to build, what is kind of a useful system? Ultimately, it comes down to contextual data, and you have to have a very accurate representation of the domain space or the thing that you're trying to operate within. And then obviously, AI is not good at everything. It will hallucinate because it is effectively just a predictor of what is next. So you have to be very careful with kind of how you what you let AI do versus kind of what you do in a more traditional way. Um, this comes to kind of what we're building and why we decided to build it this way. Ultimately, right, the goal of all of this is to let AI do what it's good at and let you do what you're good at. So it kind of in the way our system works today, and obviously we're continuing to improve it, is we have AI constantly monitoring everything you're doing in your business, figuring out, depending on the KPIs that you give it, et cetera. Obviously there's kind of a human in the loop there before you, send stuff to your vendors or kind of take action. And then we have a whole set of tooling built around the AI actually being able to kind of take that action for you, right? So the thing that we always work towards, and we'll get into a little bit more of this, is making it feel like you're talking to just a very, kind of all-knowing employee in your business. Because ultimately you shouldn't have to think about it like AI. You shouldn't have to change the way you think or operate. You should just be able to interact with it much like you would, kind of that person who's been in your business for 20 years and knows every part you've ever made, right? So that's kind of our goal. Ultimately, we've seen this drive incredible amounts of, obviously reduction in overhead, and then ultimately capacity and therefore revenue in these businesses. So kind of back to where we start with this, right? The more we thought about it, the more we realized that AI needs to know like about your parts. It needs to know about kind of all the other parts of your business. And it needs to know it in a way that it's relational to it, right? If you've ever played around on the back end of your ERP, it kind of looks like Excel. In most cases, fundamentally, our system is built on a very different data structure, right? So when we looked at kind of like what manufacturing is, at its core, it is effectively like a series of transformations that takes you from like one set of states in the physical world to like your resulting state, right? So what we're effectively doing is we're looking at, here's the state you want, i.e. like the orders, the line items, the customer requests, the manual jobs, the min stock triggers. And then we take a look at where you are. And then there's kind of a calculation of kind of the difference between that and the fastest path, right? So like that is how we store everything. And that's what enables a lot of the other intelligence. Obviously, you can't sell just that. No one buys algorithms. They generally buy kind of useful products. So on top of that, we've built kind of workflow specific modules, right? And these are the things that you do every day. You send quotes, you send purchase orders, you invoice people, you ship stuff out, you receive things, you do work, right? You schedule things on machines. Like that is the kind of workflow modules we built on top of that. And then the AI, we sort of built alongside it to where it can operate all those modules, building context from that really powerful data layer, and then taking actions kind of wherever it's relevant for you. So that's sort of architecturally what that looks like. Obviously, these are kind of the modules, right? So it's effectively like a resource planning and execution system. And these are all the different places that it understands. It knows what all these different entities are, and kind of how they relate. Of course, we've had, the luxury of having some great development partners on this. And, obviously we get more and more customers every single day. So we continue to get better and better, kind of as we continue building the system. So roles that we sort of designed around. I mean, again, we want this thing to feel like it's a member of your business. And there's sort of a couple things that we see manufacturers do a lot and kind of personas and use cases that we have, right? The first of those is going to be your sales and estimating. I'm sure, probably we figure out everyone at some point quotes work and gives someone a price. So we've built kind of specific workflows for that, powered by all of this data we get to have, right? Because we know almost everything about the business, we can do this more accurately than pretty much anything else out there. You can feed it an engineering drawing and it will go all the way through finding similar parts, pulling out historical data on how you performed on similar parts, ultimately to put together a quote for your customer that you can send digitally through our platform. Engineering, this is sort of where most of the magic comes in, right? You have to figure out how to make this thing your customer just sent you. Again, we're able to use a lot of historical data, including even like quality checkpoints, to figure out kind of a recommended plan of action on how you're going to take that into account. Same thing with purchasing, right? If you need something in 2 days, you're probably not going to buy it from the same place that if you need it in 3 weeks, in large quantities. So our agents kind of understand that. And then for the shop floor, this is really where it gets powerful, right? You might have a couple hundred people on the shop floor, but only a management team of 10 to 20 people. If those people go bother your management team all day, your management team gets nothing done. So AI can kind of sit between them and answer some of those questions for them, because ultimately it had access to the same data, and sometimes it's honestly faster at interpreting it. So those are kind of the roles we designed around. That's kind of like how we want our AI to behave. Again, modeling it really after what people do in these businesses today. How do you actually use this? Well, there's probably the things you guys are used to in ChatGPT, right? We have like an in-context chat. So if you're anywhere in our app, you can open a side panel and say, let's say you're on, one of the parts that you make that's part of an assembly. You can say like, hey, where is this part used in the assembly? Explain to me what other parts are similar to it. Go. And it knows kind of what page you're on, and it can actually start to build context from there. Probably the thing that people have used the most is an email interface. So you can just email your agent, right? You can CC it on emails. You can email it directly. It's obviously protected. It'll only answer to you. It's like really, really well trained in that way. And then you can take, for example, a request coming from your customer, send it over to your agent and tell like, hey, go start building this part out for me. And what we see is it typically gets people 80 to 90% of the way there while they're not even in there. And we've had customers like, text us and they're like, hey, like, I was at my kid's soccer game and like forwarded this thing to AI. And then it was just like there Monday morning. So really, eventually we think we can get to almost running it, headless in that way, right? No one loves interacting with their ERP system. We think ours is pretty good, but if you can just avoid that altogether, that's going to be even better for you. On top of that, obviously, we have certain automated workflows, right? The things that you do every single day, you can program those. And then reporting, of course, you can get pretty deep with that and say like, hey, every morning I want to know these like 15 things about my business, put it in my inbox, and it will go do that too. I guess as a quick note, especially if you guys do work that is at all ITAR regulated, you have to be somewhat careful with these models, because if you go use a commercially available model, they will trade on your data. That's what they do. That's their whole business model. So please do not send like stuff into, otherwise you end up with these, helicopters that look a lot like the US ones, but they're someone else's. So just be careful that with us, we privately deploy everything in our own kind of AWS GovCloud instance. So it's not trained on, it's just yours to use. So just be careful when you kind of go use them. Now let's go through some kind of use cases here. This is sort of the stuff that it does today that's continuing to get better every day. Obviously, we briefly mentioned quoting. The way that this works specifically is super cool, right? We're able to read drawing packages. We've really trained it like, here's how we understand GD&T. Here's how we understand assemblies. Here's how we understand, kind of the structures that make these things up. And then of course we've trained it like, here's what this particular shop is able to do. Here's, kind of historically how they've performed against these things. And then after we read off of that drawing, we go back into that graph. We go find the nodes in that graph, right, that are most similar to the thing you're asking it to make. And then we continue to build that context from there. And that's what lets us, basically feed these big models exactly the information they need. From there, obviously, it's going to go ahead and create routings. I mean, we've seen this thing make like work routings that are 10 plus BOM levels deep with hundreds of parts in them. That would take a person probably the better part of the week. It's doing it in the course of, just a few minutes. Anyway, puts that all together, ultimately spits out kind of a price. Obviously, you can edit that. You can figure out like, hey, it made this assumption here. Maybe that's not the assumption I want to make. Maybe it estimated this thing was going to take 10 minutes. I think it's going to take 35, and it will build that buffer in. And ultimately, our kind of hard-coded costing engine is going to take the stuff that the AI puts out, send it through there, and ultimately give you a price. And I mean, 85% is probably not even a big enough reduction in time. It's pretty incredible if you're not having to do all that stuff manually. The other thing that people have found is super powerful with it is purchasing, right? So most shops, before you can make anything, you need the material for it. That's kind of a fairly, safe assumption there. Obviously, it's hard to know, okay, when should I buy what? How much of it do I need? What are the best vendors to choose for this? And because we're sort of the system of record and we know all that information, we can then actually figure out, okay, what's the best way to aggregate this? Should we maybe buy some of the stuff ahead of time? Obviously, our kind of hard-coded MRP calculations are going to give you that purchase by date. They're going to give you exactly what you need when based on your bill of materials. So we're still doing that stuff in regular code, but then AI gets to kind of interpret those results and based on your past purchasing behavior, edit that to give you much more fine-tuned recommendations. And, just kind of surveying our customer base, they tend to save 15-20% kind of on their material costs on average, just by like using some of this aggregation and being smart with what they buy when. Of course, reporting. It's one of those, the design team didn't quite finish the quotes there. It's one of those things where like you can go look at dashboards all day. You can download CSVs. You can have that smart intern that you got like working in the back room to look through stuff. You can do all that, but it's much more interesting to just like talk to your data, right? So you can ask it pretty much anything you want and it will go find that data, right? If you want to know like, hey, who's most efficient at running, this particular operation on the lathe, it's going to go look through all of that data of like anyone who's ever run that thing, and it will just give you the answer, and then it'll provide you links back to where it found it, right? So it's very conversational in that way. And, you can also just like build out a prompt of everything you want to know every day, and it will just deliver it to your email. Like if you want it Monday at noon, you can have it Monday at noon. And a lot of teams are using these reports, obviously with links back to the system, to kind of have their Monday morning production meetings or kind of whatever else. And the nice part about these reports is you can ask it like, hey, I want to know these things. And also based on that data you looked at, I want you to give me XYZ recommendations. And then when you open that report, you can just then go tell the AI like, hey, those 3 recommendations you made, I want you to take action on the first 2. If that's purchasing, if that's rearranging your schedule, any of that you can do very quickly, right? So it's not just here's my data and here's what it is, but also like, great, here's the insight you had about that. Now go take that action for me, as opposed to you go manually clicking around. This is sort of a FOMO our customers discovered. So we never built the AI to do this, but it's really good at it. We've had customers just take photos of random stuff they found on the shop floor, right? And their operators are like, hey, I need 5 more of these. They take a picture of it. They tell the AI, I need 5 more of these. My manager's Kale, send it to him. And it will actually figure out what that thing is. And it will go make the draft purchase order and put it in their manager's inbox for them. And this works even with parts that aren't in the system. So this particular photo is this shop does a lot of grinding work. And they ran out of, I think it was like a 320 grit wheel. They'd never purchased that wheel in our system, but they purchased the kind of 220 grit equivalent from the same vendor. So the AI figured out, okay, this is what this thing is. Let's go in there. It's from this vendor. I see this other purchase order for this thing 3 months ago. I've made a new draft item for you. Here's your PO. And it was just sitting there, and all the guy had to do was go like figure out the price, put it in there, and hit send. Again, we never built it to do that, but because we gave it access to the entire system, the AI was able to navigate the tooling it had and figure out how to take this type of task, right? Much like if you teach your admin how to place purchase orders and what grinding wheels are, the AI has that same training, and it's able to kind of navigate and figure out its best path forward. Um, yeah. And then, of course, the conversations, right? We've seen people just go back and forth with this thing so much, right? Like, instead of going to take actions themselves, they'll just go like ask it to do things, or, even our AI, we've developed it to have memory too, right? So actually every single database object in our system has like AI, we call it AI memory. And effectively what that is, every time it touches that part, it will go basically figure out what did it learn about that part at that time it touched it, right? People use this too for like even saying like, hey, like, John showed up a little bit late today to work. It'll like put that on his record, or say like, hey, like John did a really great job. Like, remind me next time for performance reviews that we should reward him for this thing he did. That's the kind of stuff it's able to do, and it really builds context on everything in your business, and just continues to get better and better over time. The customers who are kind of our early adopters of this, it's rare that they touch most other parts of the system. They're really operating their business through chat, and it's incredible. Obviously, it takes a while to get there. That being said, we have really good migration tools from other ERPs. So let us know if you want that in your business.